Well, good morning once again and Shabbat Shalom. This morning, it is our privilege once again to learn Torah with Rabbi Hillel Silverman. Hillel, good morning and happy Hanukkah.
Good morning, Rabbi, and a happy Hanukkah to you.
So this morning is Rosh Chodesh, it's Hanukkah, and it's Shabbos. It's a 3 Torah morning. It's a big morning for Torah. Please teach us. Tell us what to look for today.
Well, we're in the midst of the Joseph narrative, 4 parshas, 4 Saturday mornings. It's the longest narrative in Genesis of any one individual. One of the great novels that has ever been written was by Thomas Mann. It was called Joseph and His Brothers. And it was 2 huge volumes, but it sure doesn't compare to the much shorter version, which is in the book of Genesis. It's great literature. It has a wonderful plot. It has characteristics and character who are very real. It has conflict. It has suspense. And all of this makes for a brilliant novel. In the beginning, we read this morning that Joseph is the favorite of Jacob. He should have known better because a lot of tragedy occurred to him when he was a favorite. And he favored his son Joseph and gave him a kutonet pasim, a coat of many colors, which probably wasn't for its beauty. It was not a blazer from Neiman Marcus. It was rather significant of chieftainship, that he would inherit the leadership from his father Jacob. We read this morning that Jacob loves Joseph more than his other children. He has Joseph report on the doings of his children. Joseph has 2 dreams which upset his brothers. He dreams of the in the field of the barley and the wheat bowing down to him, and then a second dream, the sun and the moon and the stars. And the father, Jacob, tells Joseph, go and report to me about your brothers. They are pasturing with their sheep. How are they doing? And so Joseph approaches them. The brothers connive and throw him into the pit and then sell him to the Egyptians. And he's in the house of Potiphar because of a problem with Potiphar's wife. He's thrown into prison. In prison, he interprets the dream of the butler and the baker. Later, Pharaoh has 2 dreams he doesn't understand. And the butler says to Pharaoh, I remember now, in prison there was a very, very gifted Hebrew. He can interpret your dream, which Joseph does. And then 7 years, good years and then bad years. Then comes the famine to Egypt. And guess who come to buy grain? None others than his brothers. And they are told to bring back Benjamin. Joseph accuses them of being spies. And so they make a second trip and bring Benjamin. And then the family is reunited. What a story. What a plot. And what interesting lessons can be derived from this morning's Torah reading. The first one, Joseph is on his way to seek out his brethren and find out what they are doing. And someone says, where are you going? He says, Et achai anochi mavakesh. I am looking for my brothers. I am seeking my brethren. And you know, this is such an important statement. I am seeking my brethren. Just identify with the Jewish people and help them and rescue them. This is the secret of Jewish survival. Not other Jews follow the same precept. They say they saw him from afar, but when you see the Jews close by, when you are seeking your brothers, when you're helping them to survive, when you rescue them, then you are living up to your tradition. One of the great organizations in Jewish history has been the UJA, the United Jewish Appeal, which has always raised money to rescue the Jewish people. In 1967, at the end of the Six-Day War, the Jews of America raised $250 million. Today, that's the equivalent of $2 billion. In 1973, in the war of Yom Kippur, they raised even more. The United Jewish People has always provided funds for the rebuilding of Israel, for the rescue of so many, many Jews from Russia, the rescue of so many, many Jews from Ethiopia. I'm going to mention a name to you, Frank Lautenberg. I don't know if you remember who he was. You may remember he was a senator from New Jersey, had 3 terms over 20 years. But before that, Frank was the national chairman of the UJA. I came to know Frank very well. I was serving at that time when he was chairman. I was serving as a national officer. I was the chairman of the Rabbinical Advisory Committee. I went on many retreats with Frank, many times to Israel. And we always followed these meetings with a caucus. What's a caucus? Everyone would commit their contribution to the UJA. And it was very, very tremendous. There were those, including Frank, who contributed $1 million a year. You could say, well, they were wealthy individuals, and they were. They could have enjoyed life. They didn't have to give that kind of commitment. Frank told me he began his service to the UJA when during the Six-Day War, he was at a parlor meeting and he pledged $5,000. His rabbi came up to him after the meeting and complimented him and said, Frank, that's a wonderful, wonderful contribution. It's a wonderful gesture. From that time, Frank became so active in the UJA. He became a very wealthy originator of its security business. As chairman, he traveled so much and led and spoke and became a senator. And Joseph was said, I am seeking my brother. And Frank and so many gifted leaders of the UJA follow the same procedure. So that's the first lesson from this morning's Torah reading. The second lesson, the brothers captured Joseph and threw him into the pit. And then comes the most pathetic verse in the Bible. Vayashvu le'echol lechem. And the brothers sat by the pit to eat bread. They could hear the cries and the pleads of their brethren, and here they were eating bread and were plotting for the killing at the beginning of their brother. I'll give you the name of another important Jewish organization. I'm sure you've heard of it, the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee. This was a very, very important Jewish group that took care of Jews who had problems in Europe during the time of the pogroms and the anti-Semitism. They would provide food and they would provide sustenance and rescue for their Jewish brethren. Edward Warburg, I'm sure you are familiar with his name, was the chairman of the National JDC. He was the son of the financier Felix Warburg. His mansion home on Fifth Avenue was given to the Jewish Theological to become the Jewish Museum on Fifth Avenue and 92nd Street. I came to know Eddie Warburg very well. It was through the Jewish Theological Seminary that I became associated with some of his products. He was a wonderful leader, raised money, spoke, gave of himself. He could hear his brothers' pleas, and he did not sit on the ground. eating bread. You could say, well, Eddie could have enjoyed life. He was financially very, very well off, but he knew there was more to his own enjoyment and gave up his time and talent and energy and money for the JDC. Another lesson from this morning's Torah reading. When the Jewish people, when Joseph interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker, and the butler was told he would be restored to the palace of Pharaoh, Joseph said to him, "Remember me, help me get out of this prison." Well, the Bible says, and the butler forgot Joseph. Lo, Zachar. He didn't remember Joseph, and he forgot him. And the rabbis say, that's redundant. He didn't remember him. Why do we need the words? And he didn't forget him. And so the rabbis say this refers not to the butler, it refers to Joseph. Joseph did not forget the fact that he should not put faith in the promises of others, in the immortal man. Not only assurances of others, but identification with others. Faith in God and faith in ourselves. We read in the Talmud, Im ein anili mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? This is what Joseph followed. You look at the wars in Israel over a 25-year period since the establishment of Israel in 1948. There were three major wars: 67, War of Independence in 48, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Each of these wars were a terrible, terrible challenge to Israel because they were only one. They didn't have faith in anybody else. And these three wars threatened to drive the Jews off the face of the earth. The War of 48, the War of 63, and the War of 67. In 1948, there were 650,000 Jews when Israel became a state. Today, there are over 9 million, almost 10 million living in Israel. In the War of Independence, 5 Arab nations attacked Israel. The United Nations assumed the independence of Israel, but did not back them. No nation did. Israel was on its own. Israel was untrained, had no army, had no ammunition, they had no tanks, they had few planes. Where were you when Israel became a state? That was 72 years ago. I remember where I was. I was living in Israel for the year. I was a senior. I spent my junior year at the Jewish Theological Seminary as a student at Hebrew University. And when Israel was declared a state, I happened to be spending a Shabbat at a kibbutz at Kfar Etzion. And I'll never forget that day. It was at 3 o'clock in the morning, Israeli time, when there was a knock, many knocks on my bedroom door. Get up, get up. We have a state. The Jewish state has been declared. And we had a dance outside, and we were singing and celebrating. I'll never forget it. There was such jubilation. The day before, we drove to Jerusalem. And it was such jubilation. The entire city was in the streets. They were singing and they were dancing. And I'll never forget an elderly gentleman, a Yemenite Jew with a yarmulke on his head, was riding on a donkey. And he had a huge place card with a passage from the Bible. When the Messiah comes to Jerusalem, he will be riding on a donkey. And this Yemenite became a celebrity. Everybody took his picture, including me, and I still have his picture in my album. But these were terrible days because the Jews had no weapons. They were not trained until Israel finally became a state in 1948. In May, they were under the mandate of Great Britain. England would not allow them to train. England would not allow them to acquire weapons. And so I remember basic training. I was not a hero, but like most people at that time, having been in Israel, I volunteered for the Haganah, which became the Israel Army. I remember basic training was a laugh. 5 days of basic training. Couldn't shoot a bullet, was too precious. We were trained on many different rifles. We never knew what kind of a rifle would be in our hands. A Canadian rifle, American rifle, Polish rifle, Romanian rifle, Moroccan rifle, and I would give it a machine gun. There were 4 of us on this machine gun. It was an old machine gun from the First World War. It was called a Schwarz Lauser. It was a water-cooled machine gun. We served for a couple of weeks in a place called Hartu. Before we got there, I remember a gentleman by the name of Moshe Perlstein. Have you ever heard the name Moshe Perlstein? From where we were at training at Atarot, 35 Israeli soldiers went up into the hills bearing medicine and food and ammunition for the beleaguered Chalutzim at Har Tzetzion. They never made it. They were ambushed. They were all killed. They were called the Lamadai, the 35. Moshe Perlstein was one of them. I'll never forget him. The night before was the 8th day of Hanukkah. He lit the candles of Hanukkah on boulders of rock, which served as his menorah. From Atarot, we went to a place called Hartu. We were surrounded by Arabs. I'll never forget. We ran out of food, and all we had was sardines and halava. That sounds like a great diet, but to this day, I cannot look a sardine in the eye. We had some dough. They were going to bake bread, but by error, they mixed some gasoline while heating the stove and infatuated the bread. I'll never forget the taste of that bread. Every time I eat bread, I still taste the oil in it. I remember from there, we were on leave. We went to Jerusalem. It was so beautiful, lovely, spring day. And there was a movie playing, and I saw it. It was called A Miracle on 42nd Street. I've never forgotten that movie. It was so nostalgic. I saw Manhattan, I saw New York, I saw Times Square, I saw Santa Claus. Everywhere when that movie plays, I see it again. Well, the world was stunned by the victory of the War of Independence. Ben-Gurion, who was a Tremere, said, the miracle of the war is that the Jews never accepted a miracle. That was one war. Im ein ani li mili. If I'm not for myself, who am I? Then there came the second major war. That was the War of 1963, the 6-day war. The Arabs had been threatening the Jews with a victory. They threatened to wipe the Jews off the map and to throw the Jews into the Mediterranean. And every night for 3 weeks, I remember we went to sleep not knowing what would happen the next day. I'll never forget, Sunday night, there was a broadcast on the radio, actually it was a Monday morning, that the war was over, that the Jews had attacked the Egyptian Air Force, a premeditated attack which wiped out their Air Force. And then on Wednesday, the Jews captured Jerusalem. I remember I was in my automobile on a freeway in Los Angeles, and I heard the news of the fall of Jerusalem and the old city to the victorious Jewish army. And I got out of my automobile. I was overwhelmed by emotion. And then on Friday, they defeated Syria, who were threatening to come down from the Golan Heights to uh, destroy the Galilee. And that was the end of the war, 6 days. Why did they call it a 6-day war? Because it was a 6-day war. In 6 days, the Jews were relying on themselves, not upon anybody else, to defeat the invaders who wanted to destroy them. I remember I was in Los Angeles a week later, and Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem, attended a small breakfast meeting and told us that the Jews were willing to give back all of the territory that they had conquered for a valid peace. Of course, there was no peace, and the Arabs instead threatened with 3 no's: no peace, no negotiation, no surrender. Abba Eban at that time remarked, the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. It was a fantastic victory, and the war will be studied by military historians for the years to come. And so these were the 3 great victories that the Jews achieved. Now, the Yom Kippur War, it was the 3rd war, and we Jews were in the synagogue, 1973. And this was a surprise. And the Jews in the synagogue in Israel left the synagogue with a tallis around their shoulders and a prayer book in their hand in order to join their units. And I remember this Yom Kippur War when I was the rabbi of Sinai Temple. Maybe you remember it too. This was a longer war, 3 weeks, and Sharon crossed back into Egypt over the Suez Canal. The Jews now surrounded Cairo and the Second Army and were on their way to conquering Damascus. And then there was peace. And at the end of the peace, short time later, Sadat, you remember, announced, I will come to Jerusalem. He spoke in the Knesset. Peace was made with Sadat, and peace was made with Jordan. There are cold wars, yes, but no Israeli soldiers or Egyptian or Jordanian soldiers have been in a conflict, in a skirmish since said. And so I must say, as we read our Torah today about Joseph, 3,500 years after Joseph, and the Bible tells us tomorrow that there were 70, this morning that there were 70 Jews who comprised the Jewish population with Joseph. And here, 3,500 years later, we are flourishing in this country, and we are flourishing in Israel. We have overcome pogroms and exiles and expulsions, and we live in many, many different lands, and we are contributing technology and industry, science and medicine, and agriculture, and so much more to the United States and to Israel. And now, wonder of wonders, after 3,500 years of Joseph coming to Egypt, there seems to be a very good possibility of peace. I'm talking about the peace that was made at Khartoum, the same Khartoum where 50 years ago there were the 3 no's: no peace, no negotiation, no giving up. And yet here we have 3 yeses of Khartoum, the same Khartoum. Yes, peace. Yes, peace. Yes, peace. Peace was made with the Emirates, peace with Sudan, peace with Iran, peace with Morocco just yesterday, and peace with the Arab Emirates. And now we look forward to peace with Saudi Arabia and peace with the Arab nations. It'll be a new dawn, a new day for the Jews and the Arabs. God willing, they will live in peace and harmony and security in the Middle East as brothers together. The Jewish people are not really a military people. We do not believe in the army, so we do defend ourselves. The Jewish army is not called an army. It's the Israel Defense Forces. It's an army of defense. We read in Zechariah, not by power, nor by might, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. And so we say, Ein Anili Mili. If we are not for ourselves, who will be? But the Talmud continues, if we are only for ourselves, what are we? And the final is, Im lo achshav ematai. If not now, when? Thank God, Joseph, we want you to know, we are still alive. Am Yisrael Chai. We still live. Am Yisrael Chai. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Amen, Rabbi. Thank you. Thank you for the vision of peace and the blessings of peace. And thank you for all that you've done for the community. And now we know the story of your service for Israel. And I promise you no more sardines. We'll feed you much better from now on. A very happy Hanukkah, a very sweet Shabbos, a freilich Rosh Chodesh, and take good care of yourself. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.